All right. Welcome to the Racquetball Show podcast. On this one, we are reuniting the first official podcast crew. So we have Charlie Pratt and Tim Prigo. We did the very first episode at the MAC, Multnomah Athletic Club. We were having a beer and just talking about racquetball, and this is kind of reuniting the crew. It's in the midst of the coronavirus, so we're doing it remotely, which is kind of ironic because we see each other fairly often just playing together. But now we have time to sit down and podcast, which should be fun. And it's good to have you guys back on the show.
Likewise, man. We'd all be together probably playing racquetball right now. So this is just our way of coping, really.
Yeah. Thanks, Dylan. This is a historic day, the reuniting. And yeah, it was just one beer. We only had one.
Yeah.
During that first one. Just one. No, but really excited to be here. Thanks. And I like the enthusiasm that you guys have for the sport enough so to get a podcast going. And Dylan, it's pretty impressive what you have created in your podcasts so far, and some of the people you've had on there is pretty impressive. I don't know how you convince all these people to do it, but somehow you do.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. It's actually easier than I think, at least I thought at first. I was like super nervous at first, just starting it. I remember being nervous recording with you guys. And then just like every single person I've asked, I think, has just been totally open to doing it, which totally was a surprise to me, but has been really cool. Racquetball community, pretty awesome people.
I have a question. This is kind of interesting idea. So in other sports like the NBA, it's like, if you had access to, say, like a LeBron James or, a star like that, you might act kind of differently around them if you got, 5 minutes to meet them. But in our sport, you can pretty much have access to any pro. So my question is, how does the personal relationship and seeing the pros more as people than maybe like sports icons, how does that like change your view of sports and how we look at like sports stars?
Yeah, racquetball is unique in that sense, and you're right about that. There's no barrier in between fans and pros. I mean, speaking for myself, like on tour, it's sometimes it's nice to have that barrier, like if you're trying to get focused for a match, or if you just got off the court and maybe you just lost and you're not feeling too great. I know there's been times where I've been, not so nice to fans because I just wasn't in the mood to really talk to anyone. Whether, like I said, it was either before a match. Sometimes it would happen when I was refereeing too. We'd be in between games. I'd go get a drink of water and someone would come up and try to ask me, and this happened a lot, like hundreds of times probably, is they would come up and ask me about a rule or, why I made a certain call and stuff. And
that's incredible. Just the fact that like you could actually go to the head referee and ask a personal rules question.
Yeah.
I don't say it to say, oh, like, we have no fans or, racquetball is unimportant. It's more like, it's really cool that we have that access. And it also makes me just like look at all the guys. And I've been a writer for the IRT for years in the past, and being able to interview all these guys adds to it. But it's just like seeing them as just more people that you can relate to, rather than just these maybe, untouchable athletes that you don't really know. They're so different than you. You don't know what motivates them, and they're on a different level and their focus is unreal. It's like you get to kind of break down that barrier and see that, oh, these are just people just really like you and me that like to play racquetball, and some are just really, really good and spend time training. So that's what I like about it.
Yeah, and racquetball is not a sport where it's at a level where I think a lot of athletes probably don't have, maybe, I don't know if egos would be the right word, but they don't consider themselves this like superstars, because as soon as you leave the club, nobody really knows who you are.
Right.
They don't have that. And, I think for our sport, maybe it would be kind of nice to have a little bit of a separation, because it would kind of give the image of that pro being or the professionals being really professionals. And, that, not saying that fans shouldn't be able to come up and say anything, but, maybe just having a little bit of a separation. And
For
so
sure.
when that time does come, when you do get that conversation, it's even more special moment,
Yeah,
But I
true.
totally agree that it's very cool. It's very cool, but maybe just for the image of our sport and for our athletes, it would be nice to be a little more untouchable, you could say, just a little bit more.
For sure. No, I completely agree with you, but it's kind of like the way, I mean, I don't, maybe racquetball athletes aren't like celebrities, but in a sense, I kind of think of like they're almost like folk heroes, like in our sport. You know what I mean? It's like Kane will like grow in the imagination of racquetball players for a long time, and there'll be all different types of stories, some untrue, I'm sure, and mostly true, but like, he'll kind of grow as this more mystical figure than I think like an aging celebrity or the memory of a celebrity. Like, you talk to some of these guys, you're like, oh, remember, who's that guy that jumped the trains, Charlie? He was the train jumper. Bo Keeley.
Keely.
Keely.
Like, for me, he's like a racquetball folk hero. And it's like, had he have been some sort of, A-list celebrity, maybe that would have been the case. So, while I do hope that more people can be successful outside the club, there is something that I embrace about this whole community we got going on.
Yeah, I think it has its pluses and minuses. I think that it's really awesome that you have this community it's this small, tight-knit little world where everybody kind of knows everybody, and it's cool going to these tournaments and you meet a few new faces and then you see a ton of people that you've known forever and you have really close bonds with them. And yeah, what Charlie is saying, where I think it would be probably a beneficial thing to have more of a separation between the professional athletes and just the everyday racquetball people, because I think when it's more of a buddy relationship, it's on the one hand great, but on the other hand it can detract from when you want to like a good example is I saw Bobby Horn had a post about essentially he was bidding his services as like a doubles partner at a local tournament, and people were pissed off about that. People thought that he shouldn't be asking for money from people. It's like he's taking from them or something. And I think because on a certain level this guy is, and most people are just friends with a lot of the people in the community, it's seen in a different way. Whereas if there were a clear distinction between like professional athlete and then the rest of the people in the racquetball world, there wouldn't be this feeling of it's bad for them to want money from us.
It's a good point.
And Charlie, do you give lessons and or advertise online, or how do you run all that?
I don't do it online, like on social media. I haven't gotten to that point quite yet.
Yeah.
Like I see the value, and part of me wants to do it because it's basically free advertising. But I do it around the club that I work at, and just on a more personal basis. And people will call or text or email or something. But I haven't gotten to advertising my services as an instructor or coach quite yet, because I'm still a player, and I don't want to. I just haven't gotten to that point yet where I'm just full coach. It's sort of coaching and lessons are a little more on the down low, you could say, or just a little bit more like locally. But as soon as I start advertising my services as a coach or an instructor online, I just think it will take away a little bit of the player aspect, and even mentally too. Like for myself, I still want to consider myself like an athlete and a competitor instead of I'm a coach, and I do the junior coaching. We'll talk about that a little bit later, I guess. But yeah, I think it's a slow transition from being player to coach. It's not like immediate, and I'm sort of in that transition, you could say. But I haven't stopped playing, and I don't really have any plans to either. So
yeah, so we did the first interview, and at that time, that I think was around maybe 2.5 years ago, something like that.
It was
And
2017.
yeah,
It was 2017.
yep,
Yeah.
I think maybe the fall. Anyway, since
Yeah.
then, a lot has happened for you, Charlie, where you have, since that point, you went to the Pan Am Games, you became the U.S. junior team coach,
Mm-hmm.
and you won your first Tier 1 in Portland, which was a hell of an experience.
Mm.
When it comes to, you were talking a bit about coaching, so you are now the U.S. junior team coach. What has that experience been like?
It's been great. I was on the team as a junior, like when I was basically since 10 years old all the way till 18. And, it was basically the best part of my life, was the fact that I was on the USA team for the sport that I love to play. It was just something I had a lot of pride
What were the
in.
kids like back then? 'Cause I was in your age group, so I kind of know. But
What
like,
you said, what were the kids like?
yeah, so like your fellow teammates, were you guys very well behaved? Were they well trained? What was it chaos? What was going on back then?
I would say, yeah, we were pretty well behaved. There were not. I mean, me personally, I was not really like. I was so wrapped up in how cool the experience was that I wasn't really looking to go and, I don't know, get into trouble or mischief or anything like that. We had our training camps at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, and it was just an amazing experience. And I was just wrapped up in that. And then going to Worlds and training for Worlds and all that it was just too important for me to be, to I don't know, to misbehave or whatever. And I think most of the other players around were the same. And as time went on, I never was the captain of the team, but you know definitely took somewhat of a captain's role. And the players who were captains were, they took it very seriously also. So that set the tone for everyone. So in my years, not really. I mean, we had some times when I was younger, there'd be some times where a kid would go out past curfew or something like that, and they'd get in trouble for it. So, but it wasn't really a wild group. I mean, it was sort of interesting just seeing how all of us sort of handled this level of being at that level of being an athlete, and competing for your country and things like that. Everybody handled that differently, and it's an interesting feeling because it's such an individual sport, but then now you're part of a team. So you're trying to encourage your teammates and things like that, and be a good team member. But at the same time, you have to focus on yourself and your own performance and things like that. So that's how it was for me, at least as a player. And I was on the team. The team that I coach is called the World Cup team, which is 14s, 16s, and 18s. So the ages are anywhere from basically 13 to 19. And I was on that team for 5 years. But they also have the younger team, which we call the Esprit team, which is the 10s and 12s. So I was on that team for like 4 years also. And so I had a long run. I mean, that was a big part of my life, but I got to experience all of it. And now as a coach, all of that experience really helps because I'm the first head coach who was also a player on the team. So I know where they're coming from. I know what it's like to try to balance training in school and maybe other sports, and the training itself and what it really takes to get to the level of being ready for a world championship and things like that. So I can relate to the players in that sense.
Yeah, what would you say to, if there's some juniors listening, and I know we all run into this even as adults, but like, you're young. I remember being young and you're training, you're practicing, and it feels like you just can't win. And as a kid, it's easy to get very frustrated. And I feel like a lot of kids get to a point, then kind of get frustrated with where their game's at, and then just kind of back away from the game.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to a junior who maybe is a little frustrated and is contemplating, you know, just walking away from the game for a bit? How would
Yeah.
you deal with that frustration?
Yeah. I would say that, and from my personal experience, it's probably that they are not doing, that maybe they're putting a lot of time in and they care about it a lot, but they're probably not doing the right things to make their game improve at a fast level. I was part of that description too. I look back on my training, it's like, man, I wasted a lot of time doing things that wasn't really like helping my game as quick as as some of the other stuff that did. It took me a while to kind of figure out what the more efficient ways of training would be. And I was like really into, you know, the hard work and things like that. But for example, I really like to run. I really like to go on runs of anywhere from 3 to 5 miles. I was a cross country runner when I was younger. I love to do that, and I considered that part of training. But I don't believe that running or doing any kind of distance running is really great for racquetball, because racquetball is such a fast twitch sport that when you decide I'm going to go out and jog for 45 minutes at kind of the same pace the whole time, you're not training yourself for racquetball. And in fact, you're actually getting slower because you're training slow twitch muscles. So that's one example of something that I used to do quite a bit when I was younger. And I would work really hard. I'd get done with these runs and be really tired. But then my game I wasn't getting any better at racquetball.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, so the hours that I was putting in wasn't reflecting how much better I was. So that's just one example of so many things. You know, another thing, I wasn't into doing drills back then. I just wanted to play all the time, play. And I would get practice games and things like that. And that's good too, but I never improved the things, you know, that I really needed to improve. Like if my serve or something is struggling, like my drive serve, yeah, you can play games and you can drive serve the whole time and maybe it gets a little bit better, but nothing compares to going to a court by yourself and working on your drive serve or working on your backhand or whatever it is. Nowadays, I'm much more into the repetitive drills that really improve certain things you need to work on. And back then, I was really bad at being able to say, what are my weaknesses and how do I improve them? I just trained. And yeah, I would have those moments of frustration. I never won a world title, never really came close. I mean, I was definitely up there with the best, but had I done more racquetball specific training or focused on my weaknesses and things like that, my improvement would have been a lot better and a lot faster. And I think that's what I would say to somebody who's maybe doesn't feel like they're improving fast enough or they're getting frustrated with it, is you have to take a step back and you have to realize what type of sport racquetball really is, physically, mentally as well. You have to look at your game and be very honest with yourself and say, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And then you just say, I have to focus on these weaknesses. So for me, the fact that I enjoyed running is not something, you got to do stuff that you don't enjoy doing, because that's probably the stuff you're not good at. And I didn't do enough of that as a junior. And I think that's probably the case with a lot of kids.
Well, that's some good tips on definitely how to improve. And clearly you want to win as the junior coach and you like want your kids to do well. But let's just say someone's not winning. You know, how important is winning truly for a junior? Because from my perspective, and the reason I asked the question is like, it doesn't seem to be, you know, if you get hung up on winning and losing, especially at a young age, I just feel like it makes your life not as good, you know? So it's like, you know, you may be doing the right things and you still may lose, but how important is just sticking with it, especially through your junior years? I think of like, you know, I never heard of Kane as a junior. And then there's other players that were great juniors that kind of just fell off. So it's like, how much is the enjoyment aspect part of racquetball and being able to appreciate it how important is that for, you know, your game in as like looking at it in the course of a career rather than just, you know, tournament by tournament?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just going to change with everybody because everyone mentally is a lot different too. I know there's a lot of players who I mean, if they lose, it's like, it's a really big deal for them. Or, you know, I mean, like winning and losing is just determines like basically what mood they're in. I could fall into that category, I guess, saying that it has meant a lot to me. Like, it's basically at times in my life, it's the most important thing of what's going on there, whether I'm trying to make the USA team or if I'm at the world championships or something. That's the biggest thing that I care about in that moment, is whether I get that win or not. You get better with dealing with wins and losses. Like, I would have huge wins, but I am able to be more calm. You know, I'm not jumping around for joy. You know, I'm able to say, okay, yeah, I won. I'm really happy about it, but I need to focus on my next match. Things like that. Where in the past, like if I had a really big win or a win that was really important to me, I probably would have been, I don't know, going around the club smiling a lot and you know, hanging out and just a good mood, things like that. But I will say too that winning, you know, even just one tough match can be such a big confidence booster that alone can propel someone like a young player for another 4 or 5 months, maybe a year's worth of training and trying hard. I mean, that's how powerful one good, solid victory can be. And depending on the person too, a loss can also be a big motivating factor. And yeah, it was tough. Like as a junior, like I said, what I thought was I was working hard, I was training hard, but then not being able to beat certain players. I remember Jeff Stark was one of them. If you know, you might see like Jeff. It took me a long time to beat Jeff, and you know, I thought that I should be beating him and stuff. He was just a smarter, more savvy player than I was, and so it was very frustrating as like a 17 or 18-year-old not being able to beat him when basically my life at that point was training for racquetball. So that was hard. I was like, you know, just that would hurt a lot when it's like I can't even beat this guy yet, you know, but that's the way it is, you know. You just have to take your defeats for a long time, especially as a kid, because you're constantly climbing, you're pushing yourself, you know. It's almost easier when you get to that top level because, you know, you're playing a lot of players that are basically around your level or players that you should be beating. But as a junior coming up, you're like, okay, now I'm in the opens and you're basically, or the pros, and you're just going to be taking a lot of losses. And it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just means like experience is huge, you know, experience and mentally being able to understand like how to keep yourself in a match, whether you're up or down, things like those are the kinds of things that you learn along the way that you can't really teach, that you have to.
Obviously, winning and losing can dictate some level of enjoyment out of the sport for sure. But I mean, you know, you watch maybe different juniors play as the coach, and you're like, this person looks like they're very intense, very focused. Maybe they get a little angry, and it maybe affects their mood later on in the day. And you have someone else who is not as affected by these things. I guess my question is, you know, do you see, and as a player, do you see a lot of enjoyment in playing competitively? Like, is it enjoyable, or like it, to me it says it's something, there's something that is expressed that is like needs to be expressed.
Hmm.
I don't know if I would call it like enjoyment. I don't know, what would you call, maybe just like being in a flow state, or how would you describe that?
Yeah, everyone is going to be different in that sense, but for me personally, you're right. It's like, of course I enjoy it, but there are times where, you know, before a match, you know, you're getting ready, things like that, and I wouldn't necessarily call that like a fun time. I mean, it's a very intense time where you're putting everything you have in mentally to prepare yourself for something, and it's not an enjoyable time. ultimately you enjoy being where you are, and the fact that you're going to compete, you have to definitely take a step back and say, okay, this is pretty awesome, but
Yeah.
it's not enjoyable. And even in the court, competing at that level it's very hard. Like, some people might be able to get in that flow state and everything, but when you're giving everything you have mentally, mostly, and that's what makes it tough. But it's sort of this bigger picture. Like, do I enjoy it? Yes, I do. I love competing at like an extremely high level where I'm giving everything I have. Like, you can't do that in a lot of other aspects in life.
It almost strikes me as good later on. Like it's like
Mhm.
you're being ultra focused on something gives you some sort of mental release later. It's like
Mhm.
I'm glad that my, brain chemistry went through that because now I feel better. But I agree with you, like, getting ready for a match and sometimes playing an intense match that's very tense is like it's not necessarily like I don't feel physically good necessarily. My
Mhm.
mind is very focused. It's almost like it'd be almost similar to like being in a fight, like flight or fight, almost like you're so focused in on the task at hand that your adrenaline's going and you can't really say you're having fun necessarily, but it certainly like makes you feel good later. You're like, yeah, I feel a lot more mentally healthy now that.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's sorry, go ahead, Dylan. You haven't said
Oh,
anything in about 10 minutes. Go ahead.
that's okay. I'm just being the point guard here. But so I remember talking to you about this, Prigo, because you are someone who seems to like experience racquetball through fun. Like it always seems fun for you, and I don't feel that to the same degree at all. Like I would say I love racquetball. I guess I'd say I have fun playing it, but more so when I'm on the court, it's like it's more about other things. It's more about like getting into the flow state, competing. Often it's like the desire to avoid losing can be one of the bigger motivators, more so than just like, yeah, I want to win this. And I think that I've seen that in a lot of other people too. I know like when I talk to Kane, he, says he envisions the other person is literally trying to take food off his kid's table, and that's like seems to be a big motivating factor for him. Talking to Rocky, he was just fed up. I interviewed him after he had lost a match to Alex Landa, and he was really, really upset about that. So I think that can be a huge motivating factor. I just find it really interesting to see what motivates different people, and I think often for the best players, it seems to be like a fear of losing to a
Yeah.
degree,
And I
wanting to maintain what they have and not lose to somebody.
and I respect that. And there's definitely that competitive dog in me as well. I think there is in every high level racquetball player, there's that to some extent. But I think for me at least, it goes down to like, a personal philosophy as well. Like how do you, when you approach life, it's like for me, uh, so through my experiences and what I believe, it's like I would like to have a long, healthy life with a strong community around me. And I know healthy means like focusing on things like matches that are very intense is healthy for me. Playing sports, like, I play other sports like squash. And it's like, and I have I work and it's like just keeping that balance in life is way more important to me. And that's what I like when I approach the game. That's what I look at. It's like, I want to be the Jeff Stark. I want to be the guy playing when he's 55 and in good shape and like having fun and know a bunch of people. And I totally respect if like, I want to have wins and accomplishments as well. But at the same time, when I get in the court, I kind of just have that, that life philosophy is still there. It's just like, let's focus on the task at hand, of course. But when I step off the court to some extent, I'm just happy to be there playing. And I feel lucky for that. I'm just like somewhat grateful to have the opportunity to even do it, to get the exercise, to be able to compete, to be able to have that release is something that I feel very fortunate for. Because I know a lot of people, they don't have something like this.
Mm.
So for me, it's like I'm in there and I'm like, I'm kind of getting mine, even if I'm getting my butt kicked. You know what I mean? I'm like, this is still me time. And I know this is good for me. And so, yeah, that's kind of the way I look at it. It's almost like, you know, it's almost like a break from some of the stuff in life. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I had to grapple with that a bit I think when I was rising up the ranks of like the open level, for instance, I think I was more motivated by getting wins, avoiding losses, just pure like competitiveness. And then when I started, I felt like to a degree I had moved beyond the open ranks and cared more about how am I doing in the pro stuff. And frankly, was losing early every single pro tournament. I feel like that was something I had to grapple with. Where if I were to keep motivating myself by like, I hate losing, I want to win, I want to be competitive. I felt horrible doing that. And that was an unsustainable strategy for me, an unsustainable way of driving myself. So, yeah, to your point, Tim, I think I've been more motivated lately by like, I want to have this be an awesome part of my life and I want to enjoy when I'm playing and I want to, use this as a way to get into good shape and to like be a part of like a awesome, fun, healthy lifestyle. So I
And
like
I
what
mean,
you're saying about the philosophy driving things.
and I look at it too. It's like maybe you could say like what separates someone from. I mean, I don't believe this, but the argument could be made. What separates someone like Kane and say who's like Alex Londa. You could say, oh, like Alex just needs to be more motivated. I don't believe that necessarily, or he needs to be more competitive. You could maybe make that argument. But I don't think it would be fair to say what separates the average club player and a guy like Kane or Londa is not motivation or the will to win. Like there is this very real thing about like genetics and like, how long have you been playing and just how skilled are you? Like, so to me, it's like, yes, you should take that Warriors attitude and be competitive and never giving up. But at the same time, being realistic and realizing it's like, I'm not I'm not a not it's like the reason I'm not a professional racquetball player is not because I just don't have the drive or the will to compete. So I wouldn't want people to conflate the two ideas. It's like, yes, when you're at that level, you need to be very competitive, but that's not like the end all be all. These guys aren't pros just because they're competitive. That's my point.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually disagree to a certain degree where I think that if you start at an early enough age, I think your mindset and your motivation over the course of time is actually probably a bigger factor than just your pure genetic capability. I think
Yeah.
the best of the best have to have both, but I think that there's a ton to be said for just spending a ton of time on the court, and what drives that is your attitude about it and your motivation and your desire to win.
And I think that's something that's actually great about racquetball because I think, yeah, there's definitely truth to that. Because maybe if you're super motivated, even from your little kid to be in the NBA, it may not happen. But like, if you're super motivated to be on the IRT as a kid, it could probably happen for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'll
So
say, I'll say for myself, like growing up as a junior, I started around like age 7 and played in tournaments and stuff. And by 10, I won nationals. I won junior nationals at 10 and under. And I just know from there, it was it was almost impossible for me to even consider giving up racquetball at that point because, once I guess you could say once you get like the taste of being one of the best, it's really hard to walk away from that. Like you just, I mean, it's really hard to turn your back. And that's sort of been my life ever since then, has been this struggle of saying like, I can't walk away from this sport because I don't know, I feel like I'm one of the best, and even at the adult level now is like me walking away right now. Yeah, there's other things that try to pull you away from the sport, or it's like you really need to be spending that much time training for these things when it's not really a sustainable future. But it's a very difficult thing to just say like, I know I'm one of the best, but I'm going to walk away. It's been impossible for me basically. Once you get that taste, it's like you just have to keep going until you're not one of the best anymore. And then it's like, okay, well, I guess it's easier for me to walk away now.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the current state of racquetball. And the first thing that comes to mind just right now is the coronavirus, COVID-19, and its effects on the world and our sport. So all the clubs are closed, tournaments are shutting down. What are you guys' thoughts on that? And what are some predictions? When do you think, I know you guys are well-read people, about when do you think we'll be back at it?
At this point, everybody's a well-read person on COVID, right? We're all
Hopefully.
experts. We're all experts at this point. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. It's like, who could ever predict? You know, I mean, I'm optimistic and thinking, I think we're gonna, you could say, flatten the curve, and it'll start going down. You know, the number of cases will start going down, and I think we'll be back to doing events and racquetball events by June would be my guess. Like, although, you know, that I think a lot of people would probably say that that's crazy, because
I mean, obviously impossible to say, and this talk will be looked back and with hindsight, you know. But at the same time, my premonition is that no events will probably go on until the beginning of next season in September. Just because I think that, you know, me and Charlie are tournament directors, and we postponed our tournament until the summer. So I truly hope that this is not the case. But, you know, my thoughts would be that, you know, everything is probably a no-go until spring or until fall. So that's my thought.
And by the way, the date is March 22nd. I'm sure you would have put that on there, Dylan, but just to give people an idea, we're about 2 weeks past when the NBA canceled their season. This is like basically the first official day of like shelter in place for Oregon, where it's now, and you know, you really only go out of your house for extremely important things like food or medicine. You don't visit anyone. You definitely don't visit, you know, your, like, anyone over the age of 60 or 70. They're saying that they're like, you know, if a loved one or something is in a nursing home, it's like, do not go see them. They say that the most dangerous thing, really, like the most dangerous thing right now, is for like a grandson to go visit the grandma, because, you know, the younger you are, the less susceptible you are to getting sick or having it being really serious. But the older you are, the exact opposite. And kids are playing and stuff. And I went out yesterday on like, not a jog. I don't jog anymore. They were sprints. I went to do some sprints, and I was actually pretty surprised at the amount of kids that were at the like soccer field, and they were playing and they're biking around and they're throwing the ball back and forth and stuff. And I was just like, did they not see the whole like shelter in place thing? I mean, you know, I was pretty surprised at that. You know, and I was doing like my sprints, and I was making sure I was, as you know, I would sprint and I would go around somebody or something, you know, like a good 6 feet distance. So yeah, really interesting times. I don't know. I mean, but we're basically at a shelter in place point right now, and this is like the very beginning of that, where we're like, wow, this is very serious.
Well, I wonder, not only obviously the events come to mind on the racquetball calendar, but also the clubs themselves come to mind. I know that a lot of people play at LA Fitnesses, but also I feel like a lot of the racquetball hotspots are these older local businesses, these older clubs, these gyms, you know, like the gym me and Charlie go to sometimes. That's just like a local small business. And we all know, you know, I have a business, and all businesses are getting hit. So I just worry about some of these gyms where they have a lot of the racquetball courts in the country. You know, I don't know how this financial downturn is going to affect the state of the clubs that host our events.
Yeah, and our gym, Tim, which is a privately owned gym.
Mm-hmm.
So LA Fitnesses and things, they closed down like a week or more ago, like a more corporate gym. I know the Multnomah Athletic Club, which is a gym that Dylan and I also go to, and you as well, Tim. They host a lot of tournaments. Big fancy club. They closed down a week ago, and it wasn't until basically today that the rest of the privately owned gyms closed down. They were hanging around as long as they really could, but then once the shelter in place announcement came out, now all clubs are closed. There's really nowhere to play racquetball unless you go find an outdoor court somewhere, which we're gonna have to talk about later after this, because we really should. We can't just put the racket down. Like, let's go find something to hit the ball against, you know. Otherwise,
right.
who are we?
Yeah, we're losing our identities here.
Right. I can't stop, guys. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy. And as far as tournaments go, who knows? I was supposed to go to the Pan Am Championships in Bolivia I would have left in a week, and that got postponed. So that's disappointing. A chance to play for Team USA, and it got postponed, and it makes total sense. Tim, I remember when you and I postponed, or at least canceled, our tournament, which was today was actually the last day. We would have been playing the finals right now.
Yeah.
Or some of us would have been, but it's like, and when we did it, I would say 97% of people were very positive. Like, okay, that makes total sense. And this was like, it was basically right when the NBA canceled the season. You and I were like, yeah, we're going to cancel our tournament too.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
we're not going to be,
no, that's
so,
I like following him,
and we were actually kind of lucky in the sense that it hit at a point for us where we were like, nothing had really started. It's like we weren't, we were far enough away that we could cancel it, and people hadn't traveled to our tournament yet. I mean, we were still over a week out, and it was like, okay, this would be a good time to do it. Let's not really wait on it. And everyone was very positive about it. Like, yeah, it makes total sense. I'm glad you guys did it. It's a smart thing to do. And even then we didn't really know where it would be at, and just to think, it's sort of funny where it's at now is like, clearly we could not have held the event, because some people were like, oh, don't make any like rash decisions and stuff. And as the days went on, you just sort of kept chuckling, because it's like, yeah, there's just no way we could have done the event. And some people were like, that's, we just had a few people like, I don't understand this, it's not as bad as you think, and stuff like that. But again, that was only about 3% of the people that
let's be clear too. It's like a racquetball tournament is a great place to pass around germs. Like,
yeah.
You're sweating, you're in the court with somebody, you're hanging out with everybody. It's like food's left, food's out. Most, people are touching stuff. It's like, I've never gotten any sort of, I'm not saying I've gotten sick at a tournament. I really haven't, but I can totally look at it and be like, yeah, would not be a safe activity if you're not trying to spread, germs.
Well, and originally when, I'd say a few weeks before the tournament, we started realizing that COVID would be kind of something we'd have to prepare for. And we sent out that email saying, hey, we're going to be very vigilant with our, we're going to have hand sanitizer everywhere, and everything is going to be clean. And we started talking about what are some of the steps we can take to make it a more safe environment. And then we really realized, we're like, man, there is so many things. I mean, if you think about the scorecards and the clipboards and the pencils and the balls alone, the racquetball is just being passed back and forth between players and back to the
air flows back into the court. It's like a lot of recirculated air. I know sounds silly, but it's like, it is a lot of recirculated air into the court. Mm-hmm. It's like, just that alone, it's like there's just so many factors. We're just like, yeah, there's just no way that we responsibly could, it would have been canceled anyway with the event ban in most states. But it's like, we looked at it and there's no way that we would be sane. It would be one of those things where in the back of your head the whole weekend we'd feel we weren't doing enough and people were at risk, and it would just not be, it just wouldn't have been the fun event that we wanted it to be.
No, and the participants would have been feeling that kind of anxiety of like, okay, I'm glad that this tournament didn't get canceled, but what are we doing here right now? We should not be here, kind of thing. And we didn't want that to be the case.
I hope the the people that are in leadership positions, even people like Charlie, too. It's definitely a time to, lead by example. And, I hope that people from the IRT and USA Racquetball and the LPRT and IRF and all the different organizations around the world, I hope that they, continue to be strong leaders throughout this, even if we're not having events, and continue to be communicative with the players and the fans. And yeah, it's going to take some creativity to climb out of this one, because clearly, like, what is also a fact that almost everyone's going through, but a lot of these racquetball organizations do not have much money. They're kind of probably on the border anyway, of the danger zone as businesses go. And then something like this is going to hit them hard. So I do worry, and I hope that we also have a responsibility to continue to prop these organizations up to make sure that things like USA Racquetball doesn't crumble under something like this.
Yeah, one thing, and it's on a somewhat related tangent, but we've talked a little bit in person, not recorded, about just the way that people on the racquetball internet discuss racquetball. So people on Facebook, people on Reddit. And Tim, I know you had a Reddit post recently about the IRT tournament. You were a bit critical of them continuing that tournament despite the coronavirus stuff going on. I was curious just to get your guys' opinion on just the state of racquetball on the internet, and any thoughts that come up for you guys with regard to how people discuss it on Facebook, on Reddit, wherever you're seeing it.
I would say sometimes it is a little discouraging. You'll be there's there's just a lot of opinions out there, or a lot of times where people aren't afraid to express what their real thoughts are, or they just don't really know what they're talking about a lot of the time. And racquetball, we're not on that level of professional sports like the NBA and things like that. That it's sort of hard to be critical of the NBA, because they have everything. They have from the production standpoint, mostly, they're right up there with the best, and we're doing our best to keep up with that stuff. And the thing is with racquetball is, like, so many people wear so many different hats. You can't just have one person and their only job is just that one thing, for example. Just you could take Dean Baer, for example, he's the guy that's talking he's the commentator, but he has so many more roles than just the commentator. He's a part of the IRT. He helps run these tournaments, and just for what they do. And then Pablo is the production manager, you could say. He's the one who does all the streaming. And I've gotten to see what it takes to create a stream like that. And just for one person to be doing all that is crazy. It at most, for example, at a squash tournament, Pablo went to the squash tournament in San Francisco. It's like a major tournament. And he said that for what they do, they have like 10 people on their crew for the production. And then it's just him for racquetball, just one. And he does a really good job still. And if you watch the two, squash, clearly their image, especially if they're playing in that, their show court, it's a better production. And we're playing in places like YMCAs and things that maybe aren't necessarily perfect for the streaming or the cameras. But if you were to really watch them side by side, you'd realize, like, there's not a lot that's different aside from kind of the image that squash has. But the production quality is very close to the same. And, for one person to be doing that versus the crew of 10 that squash has is really pretty impressive. But it sort of shows, like, there's not the money to hire more people and to make a better and just continue to make a better production, you know. So for how much each person has to do in order for them to make an event like that happen is just an extraordinary amount of work, and things fall through the cracks sometimes. Yeah, I mean, some things aren't perfect basically, but it is a little bit of a bummer when people don't really understand that, or they just don't come to the tournaments. They just see what they see through online basically.
No, I agree. I think it's easier to criticize something than it is to build something or to help something out. And to your point, it's like, I think that a lot of what goes on, like on the internet, with what is available to the average fan is awesome. So on one hand, I want to say, if you're listening to this and you're just a fan of racquetball, like, there is so much good stuff on Reddit and on Facebook and on YouTube. You can watch live streams, pro matches. You can reach out to get lessons from like Sudsy Monchik. You can watch Bobby Horn and Robert Collins, their training regimens. There's a ton of really valuable information. It's like, even on Reddit, it talks about like how to find clubs in your local area, how to hook up with different players. There's a lot of good stuff. But at the same time, you know, a lot of discussion that takes place on the internet can be ruled by a vocal minority. And I feel I wouldn't want someone who isn't quite in the mainstream to look at racquetball and think this is, you know, online doesn't represent the diversity of opinions in the sport. And I just want people to know that it's a lot of the discussion and stuff is not necessarily what you're going to get if you go into the racquetball communities themselves. So that would be my one kind of thing, is that, you know, and to that point, one of the reasons why there are vocal minorities and the reasons why, you know, people have to wear a lot of different hats is because there's a lot of holes to be filled in racquetball. There's a lot of positions that need filling. So it's, you know, they can just get filled by whoever. Now, the plus side of that is that if you're like a young creative person who's looking for an avenue, well, we may have a lane open for you. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's a lot of opportunity for someone, I think, in the sport, because it's like, if you want to become like the commissioner of the IRT, like, you could maybe do that someday. Like, that is not an unreasonable goal. Or if, let's say, you're hearing this right now and you're this, you know, you're maybe just out of college or just out of high school and you're really into video editing and you want to get your work out there, well, there may be a you know, maybe an unpaid internship for you at the IRT, where you can actually truly affect what the makeup of what the sport looks like. It's like, people can actually truly affect things. And so there's not necessarily a lot of to get into a lot of these positions, but at the same time, it allows people with an idea and an opportunity to come into the sport.
Yeah, a few thoughts that I have are just, one, I think there's a pretty big disconnect between what you hear people talk about in person versus what you see on the internet, where I think, Tim, you're totally right. There's a vocal minority of people who can be super critical of the sport and its direction, and they can be critical of organizations like USA Racquetball and the IRT, and they can be critical of individuals. You know, I've seen criticism of like Kane and of who, like John Scott at the time, of the current IRT people. And what I often think when it comes to that, these are thankless positions. These are thankless organizations. And a lot of these people are doing a ton of work, especially on the organizational side rather than the playing side. They're doing a ton of work for no pay or little pay, or they can even be like losing money. And then they're seeing this criticism of them on Facebook. And I don't think people understand that they're criticizing a specific person who's putting in a ton of time, basically volunteering, and who's just trying their best. And that can be really hard for the people in those positions. And that sucks. And for the players, for if you're Kane and you're getting criticized online, despite being completely dominant, I mean, that's never a good thing. And at the same time, I've been guilty of, and I think that there is something to be said for providing constructive criticism and saying it'd be great to see this or that or the other thing provided by racquetball. So yeah, I see both sides of it. I am really not a fan of people who just want to entirely criticize people or organizations without really doing anything to help themselves. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts.
And this goes back to what we were talking about, the disconnect between the professional and the fan and the organization and the fan or whatever. You guys ever watch like First Take or some of those sports shows with like, Shannon Sharp and Stephen A. Smith? And they're kind of entertaining at points. And I think it's kind of looked on as generally good fun. The guys try to make some points. They call things out. They just talk about the hot topics of the day. I can't imagine. I would think if that were to happen, the discussion were to be about racquetball and racquetball players, I think people would look at that as attacking other people, because in racquetball the barrier is so thin that to get up on there and critique something that Kane has done or something like, how often are these guys critiquing something LeBron did in his personal life and how it affects the organization of the Lakers? It's like, well, you could say the same thing about Kane affecting Prokenix, and there's tons of issues that are ripe for discussion, but we can't exactly have them because it feels insensitive, because they're just part of our community. It's not like, to some degree, it seems like when like Stephen A. Smith is talking, he's almost a commentator on the dramatic play that is American sports. It almost feels there's like a theatrical nature to it. It's not like you're necessarily calling out, saying individual people are evil or stupid or whatever, but it's kind of like there's this grand spectacle in front of us here in American life. That's the American sports, and we can kind of critique them and talk about them. And it doesn't feel like we can actually really do that in racquetball. What do you guys think?
It's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, even going back to how it's not as easy to have negative things to say about the NBA or something, that maybe not is true, because if you were to go and watch a highlight video of LeBron, one of the first comments you would see is like, I don't know, just probably something negative about him.
Well, do you think it feels less cruel when Stephen A. Smith critiques LeBron because they're both extremely wealthy and live great lives based on their professions? And if we can, we said something very critical about, I don't know.
Well, here's the difference. It goes back to like almost the first thing we were talking about, is that disconnect between fan and athlete, like not having that disconnect in racquetball. If someone were to come and say like something negative about Kane or you or I, it would, it's like we would see that, and it's almost like you could just respond. You could just be like, wait, why, what
And people do.
What's up with that? Yeah, like, why would you say that about me or something? But for LeBron, he probably never even sees it. I mean, I'm sure he sees some.
It's almost part of the media spectacle. It's like, for him, he can't take that stuff too seriously. But I imagine, he takes certain things seriously. But it's like, I can't imagine that LeBron gets super pissed every morning when he hears every little thing that's said about him, right?
Mm. Well,
yeah.
You wake up every morning and just say like, whatever, I know people are talking bad about me, and you just, whatever. I mean, you hear it in like rap songs all the time, right? Or what, I don't know, just haters gonna hate. And
it's a part of a thriving industry, like having the commentators, whether you love them or you hate them or you agree with them or you disagree with them, it's a sign of a thriving ecosystem. And maybe that's kind of a little bit what we're even trying to do. But it's like, you may think that those sports pundits are stupid, but it shows how successful the sports themselves are, that they can spawn whole kind of discussion forums about themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do see a whole lot less. So there could be criticism of players, like people criticize LeBron all the time or whoever, but you don't see nearly as much criticism of the league or the NBA in general. Whereas I think a lot of what you see in racquetball is just straight up criticism of USA Racquetball or this tournament director or IRT.
They do
Yeah,
hold
so
the leagues to account sometimes, and the
a bit.
commissioners, feel, that. Yeah, it's hard to say. I'm really not sure about that. But yeah, it just feels a little bit more personal and a little bit more, it's a little bit more hurtful and a little bit more real in racquetball than it would be talking at the bar to your friends about, professional baseball or something.
Well,
Yeah.
there's the. Am I still here? I got a message saying, okay, all right.
You're good.
Am I here?
You're live.
So, we talk about like the keyboard warriors, and there is like this population that enjoys basically sitting there and kind of, it's almost part of their personality in a ways. And I could relate to that. Like I was not as positive of a person in my past as I am now. Like I'm a little bit more, I don't know, I just chilled out a little bit. Whereas before I was like, I thought I sort of had a negative view of a lot of things, and it was easy for me to just, when you see something, you just criticize it. And I don't think that really has to do with like racquetball, like the IRT, USA Racquetball, or LeBron. I think it's just that the people who are saying these things, it really is more of a personal thing for them than it is what they're actually talking about. I mean, like, are we, yes, we take their criticism and we try to improve upon it, but it's not that racquetball is necessarily doing a lot of things wrong, or LeBron or anything like that. It's just that there's a population out there that loves to just get on the keyboards and state their opinion on the negative things that they see and whatever they, and that's, that's at least my take on it. Is it's not really that anyone's doing a whole lot of things wrong. It's just that there are people out there who like to express their opinions.
Yeah, no doubt. So with that in mind, though, we talked a little bit about how people always have these ideas for how to improve the sport. And this is in no way meant as a criticism of the current state of affairs, but what are some maybe even half-baked ideas that you guys have for how we could improve racquetball from where it is today?
Go ahead, Tim. You got anything?
Wow.
Tim, I know you have a lot of half-baked ideas about racquetball and how to improve.
I haven't had a big one in a while. That's my issue. So what comes to mind off the bat? I could probably, think of a few things. What comes to mind off the bat, and I do really like the broadcast, would be to continue focusing on the video end of things. So have highlight reels that are spliced together with cool graphics and cool music. I think continuing to, if you have to like look at the landscape, I think continuing to evolve and make the broadcast better is something that is going to be important. I think one of the biggest things we can do to kind of like grow the professional game would be to display racquetball in all its glory. What I mean is like when my like girlfriend had come watch me play racquetball for a tournament at like an open or pro level, she's like, it is so fast, and people are diving around. It seems very fast, very intense. You understand the athleticism of the athletes. I don't feel that, though it has gotten better, and I couldn't do better personally myself, but it's like though the production value has, I think, gone up slightly. I don't think it truly conveys the physicalness, the speed, and kind of the adrenaline inducing things that we do on the court. So my thought would be, when people kind of see it as more of like, I want to see racquetball as more of like it's more of like a Red Bull situation. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, I'd like to see it, as more extreme in that sense. So yeah, for me, it's like figuring out a way to convey the physicalness of the sport to people on their smartphones.
What would that look like?
To me, that would look like, what I'm picturing in my head is like high quality, not live video necessarily, but like high quality video production done during a match from various angles with very good sound effects. And yeah, because I mean, I do know that like you even watch some of the rallies from the tennis broadcasts from 50 years ago. I think some of those do a much better job of displaying the athleticism than the IRT broadcasts do currently. And that's a lot of because they had professional cameras on swivels with editing crews, and they were all mic'd up perfectly. Now I know it's much hard to do that in one day at a YMCA when you don't have all the amenities. So I clearly understand that, but I think trying to figure out a creative way to let the athleticism come through over video. I don't believe like I love audio, video, I'm a video game guy. I love it all. I know the technology's out there. It's like it's not unattainable to get better cameras and have someone who really understands the sport edit very well. It's like watching a music video. The editing is done, right on cue with musical cues and certain things in the video are gonna, you know, people can come up with ways to make a racquetball video that induces the emotion that I think it should. I don't see it being done yet. That's all.
Yeah, it's definitely my opinion is also that it's technology can probably be the single greatest factor in the popularity of racquetball.
I just sorry not to interrupt you. And don't get me going here, but I don't think that the IRT broadcast or any racquetball broadcast truly bring in new people. I think it's great fan service for the constituents that we have or people that already play. But I have not, I've shown so many of my friends that don't play racquetball and no one has been really interested or impressed, or they may ask a few questions, but it's not gripping by any stretch of the imagination. So I think we need to come to that fact that it is not entertaining beyond those people who love racquetball already.
Right. Well, it's a really difficult game to understand if you've never really seen it before. Is I mean, just especially at the high level, like the ball at how fast it's going,
True,
which is 150 miles an hour, and then you've got lines in the court, so and
this is in no way to diss what's going on now, because there have been improvements made, but I can tell you, explaining the rules of racquetball, watching some of those old, tennis channel productions is 10 times easier than even the current IRT streams.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'll say too. It's like you can have a chance to explain to people what's going on with a better stream, but I feel like where we're at now, it's like people don't even really want to ask. I feel that it's like you can't, it's not helpful. It's like pointing at it almost seems like you're pointing at pixels.
Well, like trying to explain racquetball in like 5 rallies would be like, okay, so that serve was short, which meant it didn't cross this line. Okay, next one, that ball skipped, which means it hit the floor. Oh, this one, yeah, that was an avoidable hinder, and now you're gonna have to explain what that is. It's
but conceptually, racquetball isn't so crazy. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of nuance to it once you get into it, but basically you just need to know you hit the ball against the wall on the fly and it can only bounce once.
Right.
And I mean, and generally people can follow that and people can understand that as a concept. But
generally, and you would also think, especially how popular it was in the 70s and 80s, clearly it wasn't like a problem that people didn't understand the rules right away. But I've got a lot of theories on this. One is that the game was slower back then, and I think it really was a little easier to understand. You could actually follow, and now, I mean, it's twice as fast. The game has totally changed. It's very, very fast. And the argument can be made that it should be slower. The game should slow down a little bit, and the rallies will become longer and things like that. And You know, I think it's a good point. I think slowing it down a little bit would make more sense. Not going faster where the rallies just really are shorter, and only players who understand the game are gonna know what was going on. And then I think even online, it's a tough sport to follow, even as a good, even if you do know what's going on. I think things like, well, the technology for one is super important, but camera angles
Yeah, the
is
court
really
itself is
important.
huge.
Your reference to like Red Bull, Tim,
Mhm.
we're just giving free plugs out in this podcast, but like
We're th-
my idea would be like GoPro would be a great racquetball company, because they're kind of on the same line as Red Bull. It's they build cameras for action sports, and they're small.
recently, so it could be
There's
a good time.
Yeah, so like, I always thought like, why don't we just put 10 GoPros all over the racquetball court? I mean, in every corner and stuff. And they, you'd be surprised the way they do it at the IRT now is they have a square camera on the front wall. It's about the size, I don't know, of just like a can of beans or something. Is like that size basically. It's on the front wall, and it doesn't get hit very often. Very, very rarely does it ever get hit. So even having cameras all over the court,
Yeah.
I don't think they would get hit ever.
Imagine, and this is like fan fiction here, but it's like, imagine we got, this match between Rocky and Kane, and there's cameras everywhere, and later on you edit it, and you're able to like, you guys ever seen Kane take swings when it's super slow motion, like super, super slow? It's so cool. So imagine you have that, and then you speed the rally up to normal speed, and then you slow it down again, and then you're able to like change camera angles, cue the music, cue the motivational words by Kane, and it's like you have an awesome promo right there.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I want that. Like I say this because as a fan, that's what I want. You know what I mean? I think that's what would appeal to folks. It's like a
Yeah.
really cool badass, because to me the sport itself is badass. Like with how fast it is, and how strong players need to be, and how fast they need to be, and the kind of the diving, it's all great, and I just want to see that on display in all its glory. That's where I'm.
Yeah, the production that we have now doesn't give the sport justice for how exciting it really is. Like in that court when you're playing, or even up close as a fan, it's really hard to capture that on camera.
It never truly will, because being courtside at Madison Square Garden is always going to be better, even if you have than having the best TV in the world. But I still think that it can be better.
I don't know. Sometimes I'm glad I'm watching stuff on TV, like not racquetball necessarily, but like sometimes like, wow, I'm glad I got to see that in super slow motion replay, and
Right.
and you're a lot more up close and personal with the players. Whereas if you're in the nosebleeds of Madison Square Garden, they're a lot smaller. So
Yeah.
it can be a lot better, I think.
Like
But we're not.
super HD slow-mo replays of great rallies as the guys are getting ready to serve,
Right.
wiping their sweat. Like that would be so much fun, and it would be super entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Yeah.
right now 90% of even more of the people who are watching these professional matches are online. When you see like 3,000 people watching at that moment at the US Open, or some of those, and there's like 300 there live.
Yeah.
Or and it's still pretty packed, 300 people. Maybe there's more, maybe but either way more people are online watching, and you can see the replays and things like that. So that's really where the future is. You can only fit so many people in the actual arena or the court, but it's all, our direction is going to have to be towards the production online.
I just
really
think it would be such a hard sell. Like I don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but like, me and Charlie have worked to just like, over the years to support our tournaments and get sponsors for them. And it's doable and certainly not easy. But But I can imagine how tough it would be for the IRT to try to collect sponsors, because it's like, the sponsors, if there was this really awesome broadcast, it's like, sure, that's something you can point to. But it's like, man, it must be a tough sell to get sponsors for the IRT. And I don't say that to like diss on them. I just say that like as a matter of fact. Like, man, if I was in charge of getting sponsors for the IRT, like maybe I could do okay, but it still seemed to be a really hard sell. I'd have a hard time being successful with that.
Yeah, no doubt. And one thing I would add is, so I think there's like the technology you guys were mentioning, making the broadcast better. I think also showcasing the athletes and their stories and all the off the court stuff,
Totally.
doing interviews, whatever it might be, in order to showcase some of the personality that's in the sport, because we have some really cool people in the sport, and I think that's what people connect to a large degree. I think oftentimes people are watching a sport more for the storyline. Like if you take boxing, when they have the 24/7 or whatever it's called,
Yeah.
that's following like a Floyd Mayweather,
It's so
that
cool.
gets people really interested in the fight, not so much just the technical, the boxing match. They want to see this because they want to see these two guys who hate each other. That's maybe the storyline that's offered, especially in boxing. They want to see that those guys go at it, and it's more the
Yeah,
storyline and the emotion that gets people interested. But
totally.
I want to,
Go ahead, dude. I just want to say one last thing.
yeah.
I say go ahead, but let me say one last thing.
Thanks, Prigo.
Another really cool fan fiction idea. It's like leading up to a tournament, maybe there's 12 or 14 tournaments a year, right? Maybe 12 tournaments, 10 tournaments. I don't even know how many more pro tournaments, but it's like you are with the one pro leading up to the tournament week. So it's like you're with that pro for 3 or 4 days before the event, and you're like with them in their home, you know, and you're like you just have a camera and you're like recording them on their training. You get to see what their life is like at home and kind of what they're like, and then you follow them on their travel. You board the plane with them. You watch them go to their hotel, and then you follow them getting ready for their first match, their warm up routine, and then you kind of show how they did in the tournament. And that kind of ends each video. It's kind of like it not only like shows the player, but it would be really cool to see how each person gets ready and deals with that. And I would like that.
I actually, probably 8 years ago, had had it all lined up for 2 people to go on tour with me for 1 year and film. One of them was a professional like videographer, you could say. I mean, he would film and then he would edit videos. He was very good, amateur video. I mean, he was basically a professional, actually. That's how he made his money. And then he ended up having a family emergency, and he was from Ukraine, so he had to go home, and it all just sort of fell through. But I thought it would be so cool, like I mean, whatever sport it is, I love following an athlete through the ups and downs of training and competing and, victories and defeats and things, and throughout a season, and seeing, I love that idea. Basically, it would be so fun to follow and see what it's like to train for this, and
Yeah, totally.
the life of a pro racquetball player, because that's not, nobody knows what that life really looks like. Not even other racquetball players.
True. Yeah.
It's like, well, so what do you do? Like, what does your training looks like? Everybody loves to see it. Everybody loves the videos of training that other pros put out, even if it's just a quick little workout or a photo of them doing some footwork stuff or something. I mean, they love it. And then they're like, I'm going to go do footwork today, or, oh, that's what they do. Okay, I'm going to do that too. Or that's what they eat. It would be just a little mini docu-series would be awesome.
Yeah, each player gets like, a week where the cameras follow him, and that's their kind of spotlight, and then it's edited to make it, 4 or 5 minutes. And yes, I would be eating those up.
For sure. Kane, I know Kane has he had somebody following him around with a camera for a couple tournaments. The US Open was one of them. I don't know if you guys ever saw like a camera kind of on Kane. It was subtle, it wasn't like, but I remember hearing that there's a company in Canada who's doing a documentary on him or something like that. So we might see something like that coming out soon if it all goes well, and that would be very cool. That'd be very cool to see how it all goes down from the athlete's perspective.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And yeah, this has been a bit of a longer podcast, so thanks for sticking in here with me, guys. But I wanted to kind of wrap it up with, what is your favorite racquetball story?
Let's see. Favorite racquetball story. Tim, do you have one off the top of your head?
Not yeah.
Okay, well, I'll probably say one of my favorite memories was when I won the 10 and under nationals. It was a trip to Baltimore, and I went with like my family, and my grandparents went also, and we also visited other relatives, and then and I was really obsessed with like Oakley sunglasses, like Oakleys. I was only 10 years old, but I had a few players at my club who had like Oakley eye guards, and I was like, oh man, I want some of those, but of course they're like super expensive. So at that nationals, they were paying $5 if you refereed a match. So I basically reffed enough matches to earn $150, which is 30 matches total, which in a 5-day tournament is 6 matches per day. So I reffed 6 matches per day at $5 a day, and won the thing on top of that, won my division, earned $150, and the very next day went and bought a pair of Oakley sunglasses, and I still have them to this day. So just that whole like Baltimore experience for me was like probably my favorite racquetball memory, and just all of it coming together, winning, having my family there, and buying some Oakleys afterward. And the club itself, I don't think you guys ever went to that club, unless you didn't go to that nationals in 1997. Did you, Prigo?
I think I did, yeah.
You did in Baltimore?
Oh, no, I didn't go. Not in Baltimore.
Okay.
He wasn't listening.
No, I just wanted to make sure that he knew.
What was your first nationals, Tim?
I don't remember, dude. I really don't. Maybe Portland, Oregon.
Portland in 98. That was the very next year.
Yeah, I think 98 was my first one.
We would have been in 12 and under.
Yeah. And dude, one of my favorite stories is from that year, because, and I have really 3 stories, Dylan, but I'm going to try to be quick with them. The first story is about nationals. When I was a kid, it was the first time I traveled without my parents up to Portland, Oregon for nationals with my friend. And we went into the hotel, and we were there a day early, and I went to the hotel, and I like took a nap and woke up, and I thought I had my match. So I went to the club, and it turns out I just seriously took a nap. I didn't like sleep through the night. So it was still the same day that I arrived I was just so hyped up. So I showed up to the club the same day that I flew in, thinking it was the next day. And then they told me like, oh no, it's like, this is still Thursday. And I'm like, oh shoot, like I just took a nap then. I didn't actually go to sleep and wake up. But I was young, I probably wouldn't have. And it was a different, like 20 years ago, it was a different time, I was
sure.
11, but alone. It was so kind of weird, right? I didn't know what I was doing out there. Yeah, my second favorite memory is not like one memory, but it's like the old school nationals that took place in Houston. My favorite memories from those are pretty much any Jimmy Lowe match, because they drew a big crowd, and he was at the height of his glory at that point. And he had a great corner man named Joe Lee. And this guy is also military, and he would just talk Jimmy up to the crowd the whole match. And you had Jimmy in there, usually playing great, giving, thrusting and doing the 6 shooters and stuff, and just really like, playing up to the crowd. And it just was such great fun entertainment. I don't think I've ever seen more like entertaining racquetball than that. And my favorite personal memory from playing is I had went down to a tournament with Charlie some years ago to Modesto, California. And as I was driving in, I think we were both playing singles. They asked me, "Oh, do you want to pick up doubles?" I'm like, "Oh, sure." Like, I want to pick up mixed doubles, and it's like I ended up playing 3 or 4 divisions, and it seemed like whatever, you know. We were on a road trip. I could play some matches, and I ended up playing like 8 or 9 matches in one day. They kind of like condensed it all. And I remember towards the end of the day, Charlie like almost takes me by the collar and leads me outside. He's like, "Prigo, you're not looking too good. Like, we need you to get in the car." Me in the car, and he hands like I can't really talk because my mouth is so dry. Like I'm like, you know, like extreme dry mouth. I probably hadn't any water or anything. And he's just giving me like this bread with all these nuts in it. And I remember just trying to eat it, but barely being able to swallow it because I was so dry. And Charlie's like, "You need to eat this bread, man." And I remember thinking like, what does this come to? Like, it was so much fun. It was one of those like absurd moments, I guess, in racquetball where it's like, I don't care that I'm like borderline, maybe dehydrated or like I'm about to like pass out, because like I'm having a lot of fun doing this, you know. So for me, it's like that. That's a great memory.
I remember. I definitely remember that. I feel like there's more. There's a few of those stories out there of Tim like barely surviving a tournament.
You have to bring it back on.
But yeah, it's like I remember talking Tim into going to this tournament in NorCal and being like, "Yeah, you know, we'll go down, it'd be great." And somehow, you know, I think it was like originally you signed up for 2 events, and then like the tournament director asked like, you want to play mixed also? And you were like, "All right, sure, 3 events." And then we get there and we realized that all of his divisions are round robins. So it was like inevitably we looked at it and we're like, "Oh my gosh, Tim, you are going to have 9 matches today." 9. Like, you know.
But, you
and
know,
it was like, I don't even remember how I did in the tournament, but it was almost like my main goal was like, we have to get Tim through this day, you know, like, "Tim, this is your day." Like, I almost felt responsible, like asking him to come down, and we drove to it too. You know, we road trip down there, and then here he is on Saturday playing 9 matches. And it's just like, is that even possible? Like, I've never heard of that. I've never heard of anybody playing 9 matches in a tournament.
either.
And we did the math on it, and some of them went tiebreaker, and that was like 20 something games that he played in that one day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was like
Down there,
I felt vaguely responsible for, you know, you getting through that tournament alive.
They were great. I remember when the tournament was over, there was no keg or anything, because it was kind of like, it's a small event. And they're just like, they just went out and bought like a couple 30 racks, and we're just passing beers around, sitting on the stoop of the court on Sunday, just talking about the tournament. So no, good people. Love that place. What was that place called? The Courthouse, huh? Modesto Courthouse, I think.
Was that in Modesto? Yeah.
It's gone now, unfortunately, but
that wasn't too long ago either. But yeah, those are definitely all. And I bet any racquetball player who's been playing for more than 10 years would have stories just like that. You know, I mean, road tripping to, I mean, Dylan, you and I road trip to Montana, a few months ago. It was awesome. We ended up going to Glacier National Park, which is, you know, a pretty amazing place, obviously. And road trips are probably my favorite thing. You can't do it to every tournament. Like, I'm not going to road trip to New York or something, but if it's like in California or Montana or something like that, where it's even possible, like that, that was the best way to do it. You pile some people in a car, save on gas, and you know something is going to come out of it, you know, something funny, like all these stories, or something cool anyway. It just opens up the door for all that stuff.
Well, Dylan, how about you, man? What's a
What comes to mind for me is we went to Bolivia for Worlds when I was 14, and that was the one year I made the team, so I was like especially pumped to be on it. And I remember a few interesting things happened from that. One, the Bolivian president spoke at the sort of like orientation for the event, which was amazing. And I remember seeing vans up in the hills and thinking like there was a little bit of political unrest at the time, and people were thinking that it might have been like, you know, security or like snipers up in the hills. So that was really interesting. Just being in Bolivia was super cool. being with the team and everything. We had our men's team like barely eked out Mexico, and I remember just being really hyped up about that. And it was also a crazy event because I would say about half of the participants and everybody around the tournament who weren't from Bolivia or anything got sick, just food poisoning in the area. You had to be like incredibly careful about that stuff. I was lucky enough to have it happen after the tournament, but a lot of people had it during the tournament, and it kind of affected the results of it, which was pretty crazy. So that was one of the most just interesting racquetball memories and stories for me. Yeah. So
Wow. That's anytime you travel to a new country, you're always introduced to different bacteria or germs or whatever, and
this may be an ignorant question to ask, but do you think players from like Bolivia and Mexico and stuff, do you think they get sick when they come to the U.S. for events? Like, do you think they get used to our water and stuff?
I don't think so. I'm not positive.
I'm not
a doctor.
I actually, and I don't know if that's like a bad thing to be even asking, but you know, when people travel, like, where were you going to go for the Pan Am Games, Charlie?
Peru, or you mean the Pan Am Championships?
Yeah, you went to Costa Rica, right? Last for the Worlds.
I went to Costa Rica for the Worlds, yep, and I went to Lima, Peru for the Pan Am Games.
Gotcha.
And like the first time I went to Costa Rica, for example, I got sick. And, you know, yeah, that's like always kind of a fear, or not, you know, it's just something you have to always bottled water. But that's a good question. Like, do players from Bolivia come to the USA and get sick? That's, you know, I don't remember. Well, the Junior Worlds was in the USA for a lot of years, many years. Only until the past 10 or so years has it started going a little more international and stuff.
Oh, you know who I want to call out an entire country right now?
Oh.
I want to call out the country of Canada. Like, step your game up and get a tier 1, Canada. You guys, deserve it, and there's enough good players that come out of there and that play there. Like, I want to see some sort of Canadian Grand Slam in the next few years, you know? Like, someone up there, hopefully they're listening. Come on, Canada. You know, all these other countries got events. Why can't you have one? Tier 2s or tier 3s. It's like, yeah, we have nationals. That's all well and good, but I think you guys need to represent and bring an IRT tier 1 up there.
I did not think when we started this podcast that Tim was going to put an entire country on notice like that. Just calling out an entire country.
You know, it's time to get one up there, guys. That's all I'm saying.
I love it. All right, guys. Thanks so much for coming on. This was a fun discussion. I hope people have made it this far with us. If you've listened to this whole thing, you're a legend, and I appreciate it. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Dylan. Yeah, and I think we should do more of these because we're going to have a lot more time on our hands anyway. We'll call it the COVID series or something, and and there were a lot of things that we didn't even talk about, but we can talk about maybe on a different one. So
bring in another person too. We'll bring in another pro.
That's right. Yeah, we just got to get 20 people in the Zoom call and just get it going.
Young, who's willing to make a few mistakes. You know, like someone non-PC that's maybe just wanting to spout out. We'll have some hot stuff.
Well, let's just get Wayne Antone on then.
Maybe we should only give him a few minutes, because it's like we shouldn't give him the whole time. But, you know, give Wayne a 5-minute, kind of like a stand-up comedian gets a type 5. Like, Wayne can present like his shit in 5 minutes, you know.
Or just have the mute button ready, Dylan.
Something like Wayne. That's a good idea.
There we go. I like it. Good stuff. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. This was fun.
All right. Later, guys. Appreciate it.